Shalom, shalom, friends. Tanny, I loved how you jumped right into the clapping like immediately. So thank you all for being here, and welcome back to Shamayim. We are so happy you're here with Shamayim Jewish Animal Advocacy. We have over 50 RSVP'd, even though we only promoted this a few days ago. So that's really great. And for anyone who can't join today, Eli has kindly offered to offer additional sessions. So we will take her up on that very kind offer to spread chesed and good tasting challah in the world. So just a few reminders about Shamayim. One is that we are now recruiting for our synagogue vegan challenge. If you're a part of a synagogue, we have a grant that we give to synagogues to be a part of our synagogue vegan challenge program for the year. So please encourage them to apply. We're launching our campus fellowship. If you know any great college students who are looking to build Jewish vegan community, that'd be wonderful. If you're not on our email list yet, please go to shamayim.us, shamayim.us, and join that so you can receive our occasional emails. And also follow social media. If you use Facebook or LinkedIn or Instagram or Twitter or whatever you use, please follow us there. And it's that time of year before Rosh Hashanah. If you can financially support us, we would love your support so that we can sustain our work and continue to grow it. With that, we're going to move into our program with the great Eli Winkelman. And if we were all in the same room, we'd all clap. And there she comes. And she had co-founded the original chapter of Challah for Hunger while in college in California. The organization now has 80 chapters, mostly on campuses in the US, which bring together students to bake and sell challah. Each chapter donates half of its profits to Challah for Hunger's national partner, Mazon, a Jewish response to hunger, and allocates the remaining half locally. And that only scratches the surface about how cool Eli is and how great her work is in the world. And with that, you're not here to hear me, but to bake some challah. So I'm going to pass it over to Eli Winkelman.
Hi, I am just going to jump right in because we have limited time and we just got to get going with this dough, right? So I'm glad to be speaking with everyone. I typically do this in person, and then over the pandemic, I did it online, but not with this many participants. So I'm hoping that y'all can chat or do the raise the hand thing if you have a question, or maybe Emma has y'all said that we hold questions for 40 minutes, but there might be questions related to a particular step. So it might be worth pausing to get questions. So I guess we have to wing it a little bit on that. I'm going to share the recipe after we're done on video. So don't worry, you don't have to memorize, you don't have to write things down right now. Are people planning on following along in the kitchen? And I can't actually, not great at Zoom. I can't see everyone's video. So can someone tell me what people are saying?
I'm not capable of that.
Okay.
I'm at a desk model.
Okay.
So wish I could.
And I know we also have people listening, so I know, or who will listen later. So I'll just do this like a show. I'm gonna start with one of my priorities in cooking and everything I do really is efficiency / laziness. So making sure that I can wash the fewest dishes possible. So I do everything as much as possible in my one bowl. And I'm just gonna start with 3/4 of a cup of sugar. With most of my baking, they say baking is a science, chemistry, but challah is blessed and I don't really measure very carefully. So this is a 1 cup measure that I'm just eyeballing 3/4 of a cup of sugar in. Just pouring it in. And then we need 1/2 tablespoon of salt. Ooh, sorry for all the clanking. Is that okay in everyone's ears? Everyone's doing okay. Okay. I've kind of a
no problem.
Thank you for the feedback. How's everyone's almost end of the year? How's it wrapping up?
I'll jump in. Pretty good.
Okay, thank you. So we just got 1/2 tablespoon of salt there, adding that. And now 1/2 cup of oil. I do all my liquid measurements in this container and I start with oil And then I get to water third. And by adding hot water third, I'm kind of like pre-rinsing the oil out of there, giving myself less oil washing to do later. I'm sorry that I just realized my hands are like not quite in either camera screen when I'm doing some of this measuring. So I apologize for that. But here we go with half a cup of oil. If you're curious, you can use different types of oil. Some olive oil is very green and can give your challah a green tint and also a little bit of a green olive flavor. So watch out for that if you're planning on doing like chocolate chip challah. Don't necessarily want chocolate chip olive. So I'm adding that. So we have sugar, salt, oil. And now I am going to do, this is my new thing. I just figured out that actually, sorry, I just added a new ingredient to the recipe that I've been using for like 18 years. So you are the first people I've presented it to. But before I move on to that, I'm going to do some hot water. And like I said earlier, I do hot water right into this thing that I've just used for oil to rinse some of that out. And the reason I use hot water is to mix it right away and to dissolve some of these ingredients.
How much?
So I'm going to do a cup of hot water.
Okay.
I have one of these kettles that like pours very slowly and I inevitably drip because I don't have the patience. It goes like it trickles out. Okay, so we got a cup of hot water. Adding that, and I'm just going to do some mixing here to dissolve these ingredients together. And then my newest addition, my new secret ingredient that I am so excited to share with y'all. I've been making this challah recipe for half my life. Yeah, something like 18 years without this ingredient. So you don't need it. But my latest thing is blended sweet potato. This does a couple things I found. It adds an orange color, which a lot of people are used to with challah. It also keeps it way softer and moister for a longer time. The only complaint I've ever had about vegan challah is that people eat it too fast. But also for the people who like forget that they have it, which is rare, it does go stale a tiny bit faster than challah that has eggs. One of the functions of eggs in baking is that it holds moisture. This sweet potato is like a great replacer for that function. But having said that, I didn't use this until like the past few months, so you don't need it. I'm back in my liquid measure and I get a different amount of sweet potato each time. By the way, I wanted to show you how I prepare the sweet potato. I cut it into rounds and steam it, and then the outside just peels off pretty easily. This is one of my dog's favorite treats, so they got it over there. And then I just blend it up with some water. I don't really measure any of those things. I apologize for my lack of measurement. So, but I will measure now because we're going for a total of 2.5 cups of liquid in here. We did a cup of hot water that it was like double tasking because it was kind of rinsing out the oil, but it was also going right into the dough. And now, oops, sorry again for the clanks. So this has a little less than a cup. I'm going to fill it all the way to a cup so that I know how much I'm adding. Adding it. And then we have another half cup to go. And I'm happy to do my best to multitask and answer questions if I'm saying something that needs elucidation on the spot. I'm also very bad at multitasking. I can't like have a conversation and do laundry at once. So far, or like fold laundry out. See, I can't even explain what I can't do multitasking wise. But thanks for tolerating. All right, so we're mixing. We're pretty mixed up. And so far we have salt, sugar, oil, water, sweet potato. We only really have 2 more ingredients to go. Yeast and flour. So here is another confession of mine. when I first started making challah, I think I learned from my mom in middle school or high school, and she used eggs. And I decided to become vegan in high school, and she said, "Great, make your own challah." And all I did was leave the eggs out. And I never really counted how many cups of flour I added after I took the eggs out, because I can't seem to count that high while working. So if someone else manages to count, great. But I'm going to tell you how I judge if I have enough flour in here, since I don't have an exact cup number. But I do start with roughly 4 cups of flour, and I'm adding it right in. You know, professional bakers won't give you cups anyway, because really something like flour should be measured in volume. Doing some quick mixing. And by volume, I mean, I'm sorry, it shouldn't be measured in volume. It should be measured by weight, because you could pack a cup of flour, get a lot more flour in there than if you get a loose cup of flour. Does that make sense? I'm saying things backwards. So I'm not mixing it all in, but you can see I still have some very floury spots, and that's okay this time. What I'm gonna do right now is put a cup of flour there. And now an extra fun part. This is one of my like minimize the mess, minimize your cleanup later tips. I could do this in another bowl, but I like to do it right on top of here. I use instant yeast. I used to think instant yeast was cheating and that you had to use fresh or what's the other kind? The kind that you mix with hot water. I can't remember what that's called right now. But it's what most people have probably used. Now I just use instant. You can get it in the little packets, or it comes in a block like this. These last a really long time, but if you bake challah every week, this is worth it. I would say, watch, it's gonna do like a cool vacuum pack thingy.
You mean activated yeast?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, active dry, yeah. Okay, so did y'all see it? Were you able to hear the like, because it's vacuum packed and it was blocky and now it's soft. Okay, so I have my mound of 1 cup of flour, and I make a volcano hole in the middle. And I just measure my yeast over that. I'm doing all the things you're not supposed to do. Like, you're not supposed to measure ingredients over your bowl in case you do too much. But I just do it because I live on the edge with my challah, apparently. And I always do like a heaping tablespoon. Instant yeast is awesome because you don't have to proof it. So you don't need to worry about like, is the temperature of this water right? Is it bubbling? So now you can see we have sorry about the lighting. Is it okay? Is the video okay for everybody?
It looks good.
It's fine.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we have our volcano, and what we need to do now is, and you can do this in another little bowl if you want, but we need to mix the flour and yeast together without getting them wet. If the yeast gets wet, it gets very clumpy. So by mixing it first, like this, just gently mixing it together, you prevent the clumps from happening. And again, if you want, this is like my lazy version, but I guess you have to be more careful than if you were to do it in a separate bowl. So in a different way, that's the lazy version. So you could do this in a separate bowl. After it's mixed thoroughly, then I just go back to mixing my dough together. I have been using a tool that I misplaced in the last hour called a Danish whisk for making my dough lately. It is a crazy looking little wand device that if I try to describe, my head will prevent me from doing anything else, and I won't be able to describe it very well, but you can look it up, a Danish whisk. It actually makes making dough a lot easier than using a wooden spoon. And by the way, I make my dough by hand. I don't like using a mixer, how the dough like curls up the dough hook. I feel like I have so much cleaning to do up there and it just drives me crazy. So I pretty much always make dough by hand. What you want to do when adding flour is not add too much at once. That means you have to add more in the beginning and then kind of taper off. And what I do, as you saw, I added like 3 or 4 cups, and then I add 1 cup, And then I'm gonna add less and less. And each time I wanna make sure that I'm mixing so that all of the dry spots are gone before I add any more. At this point, I want to move on and not use the wooden spoon anymore because it is getting hard to use. Do not put this in your sink. Put it in here and come back to it later. And I will explain why later. So my move when I'm mixing dough by hand, Marshall, I might need your help right now. Actually, it's okay. I think it's okay. Okay, so I hold the bowl with my left hand and I hold it against myself. I use my right hand as a whole, not individual fingers, but as a shovel. And I scoop from the bottom, pull up, do a gentle punch or two, turn the bowl with my left hand. I'm always leaving my left hand on the bowl. So while my right hand is getting all doughy, my left hand is staying clean so that I can push my glasses up on my face or whatever I need to do with my left hand. So I'm just gonna do a bunch of this. And as I go, I'm also gonna get that dried flour off the side of the bowls, sides of the bowl. There's my inability to multitask. Sides of the bowl by scraping, or not scraping, I'm just rubbing. It's like glue, you know, when you have glue on your hands and you just rub your fingers together. So I'm just twisting, digging with my hand as a whole, not individual fingers, scoop, gentle punch or two, twist. And that way I'm getting all the way around and not leaving any part of the dough either too doughy or too floury hidden somewhere in this bowl. And sometimes I lift the whole thing of dough up, turn it upside down, and then go again. So while we're doing this, this is actually kneading. By mixing it together like this, I'm doing the kneading process. And there's all sorts of, you know, you must knead for 10 minutes, you must knead in this way. I don't do any more kneading than just by mixing. So back to challah dough, I'm going to add in some more. I'm not adding a full cup this time because it's getting doughier and doughier. And there's a spectrum. At first it's like liquid and then it's batter and then it's dough. And now I'm going back to my scoop and spin technique. And at some point, you do have to get all this dough off your hand, which I usually do single-handed until I can't. And then I do involve my left hand. But at this point, this dough is not very sticky, so my left hand is still staying clean. So what did y'all do when my mini meltdown was happening? What did I miss? Anything exciting?
We were just watching you struggle with
Oh
it.
my God, I was struggling. Did I say anything really embarrassing?
No.
Anything to get you in trouble with the FCC? All right. That's good. Okay, so I'm doing my like flip over. Sometimes I've found that in my haste, I have added too much flour at once. And in those situations, I literally pick up my ball of dough and my bowl and spill my bowl over onto the counter if I need to. I don't think I'm quite there yet, but this is looking pretty solid. You don't want to add too much flour. One of our chapters of Challah for Hunger, I went to visit once, and they were adding as much flour as they could because they thought that that was making more dough. And it doesn't. It just makes really, really, really dense dough. So you don't actually want to add too much flour. You don't want, you want your dough to be solid, because one thing that can happen if your dough is too soft with not enough flour and you're trying to have a nice braid, the strands can actually kind of like melt into one another. So you do want it solid, but not too dense. I wish everyone could go around and feel each other's challah dough, but we can't do that right now. So I have this pretty good feeling dough and all this extra flour in there still. So I'm just gonna like dump it out onto the counter. I never, ever, ever put flour or floury things in the sink. The reason for that is flour and water gives you like paper mache all everywhere, stuck in your sponge, everything. And the easiest way to clean up, that was the dog, sorry. He was just alarmed by his own beauty. I'm not sure what. The easiest way to clean something floury, I usually do this over the trash can, but to demonstrate, or to clean something doughy, to demonstrate, I'm just going to do it right here. I put dry flour on it and just rub it. I do this over the trash can, get all these little balls of dough off, and then I wash it in the sink. But you can see, you can get a spoon pretty clean doing this. And it will save you a lot of hassle of trying to clean this stuff out of your sink. This is one of the tips I've learned over making challah with tens of volunteers over years in many places, is don't leave this gunk in the sink. My mom always taught me to leave things better than I find them, especially like kitchen sinks. So that's pretty clean. Yeah.
So Ellie, if you had the Danish whisk, what would you be doing now instead of the spoon?
The same way. It lasts a little longer than the wooden spoon when I'm mixing. I don't have to switch to my hand as early. And I don't know if I guess maybe y'all looked it up while I was melting down. So you saw that it's like this wiry thing, and I just do it the same way with, I rub flour on it, and it gets all the dough bits off. And I do that over the trash can, so I don't have to like wipe all this stuff up with a sponge. Does that all make sense? And that's why I advised you earlier not to put this in the sink, but just to just leave it in there so that we could deal with it over the trash can. Okay, so now I have, did I answer your question?
Yes.
Dough? Okay, now I have this dough, and I do everything in my bowl. So there are like fancy steps we can take right now to really like make this dough a little more cohesive, but those require working directly on the counter, which I don't want to be bothered to clean to the degree I would want to if I was going to put dough on it. So I'm just skipping those steps. And instead, what I'm going to do now is put a little bit of oil on top of here so that we can give this a break and let it rest, and we get to take a break and answer questions or eat a snack. And then we come back to this, and at that point we'll do the braiding. But we do the oil so that it doesn't dry while we're doing that. And what I always learned, and what some of y'all probably know, is the way to check if you have enough flour in your dough is with a clean hand, you gently press. And if your hand comes away clean, then you are good. You can be sticky if you want to be. And what I mean by that is if I go in here with sticky hands already, or if I squeeze, I'm going to be sticky. So you have to like work with the dough a little bit and not tempt it to be sticky. Now that I have all this on my hand, I'm actually going to do my flour move again. So you saw that I just got some dried flour on my hands, and now I'm rubbing my hands. I learned this technique of getting that dough off your hands at Cal State Long Beach in their culinary arts class, in a culinary arts class that they have. So now I'm gonna like work those little bits back into the dough, and then I'm gonna do my oil coating. And I flip it over and do some on the other side. And then what you can do now is let this rise, but at the very least, take a 10-minute break. If you want to let it rise, you can let it rise for an hour or a little bit, however long you want, really. But you do want to watch out for that it doesn't overflow and fall out the edges of the bowl. Once that happens, I'm jumping over to a chat question. I'm just using regular all-purpose, unbleached, but not whole wheat flour, just as plain as can be. So you don't want the dough to overrise the bowl. And I often don't use this as a rising opportunity. I use this just as a little break. Ideally, what I would do if I have all the time in the world and my schedule is perfect, I like to just put this in the microwave, just like this. And I'm not actually going to use the microwave on it. But I put it in the microwave because it's a contained space Bugs are not getting in there, but as the dough is resting and then as the yeast is doing its thing, it's generating heat, and the little bit of heat in the microwave encourages more and more rising. So I'm going to do that for a few minutes while we do any questions that y'all have so far. How does that sound? Okay. Okay. What made me decide to start? I don't remember, or not, I don't remember. I can't, but I can. I have a clean hand. I can click over. Oh, I read online about people adding pumpkin, and I wanted to try that, but I didn't have any canned or not canned pumpkin. But I did have a sweet potato, so I just did it. And I haven't tried it to compare with the pumpkin, but I buy a sweet potato and I steam it, and it's pretty simple. And then I also have these like little treats for my dogs, so because they love sweet potato. Sweet potato was a lifesaver in giving one of my dogs pills 3 times a day because he liked it even more than peanut butter or cheese or anything else that you might put pills in. I know this is what everyone joined this call for. I have never done gluten-free baking, so I'm afraid that I cannot answer that question in an educated way, and I apologize.
I can if you want me to.
That'd be great.
Okay, so the gluten-free flour usually has to, there are challah pans that are actually, you have to almost pour the gluten-free flour in, and it has kind of a braid in the bottom. So essentially, you can't braid it. There's actually a company that makes gluten-free challah flour, but it's very expensive. I can't remember what it is, but it's like $18 for a package or something like that. There is a gluten-free recipe that I did make once, where if you're very careful, you can get the dough to stay in a strand, and you can sort of braid it, but it's not like braiding regular gluten flour. You just have to be very careful, and but it came out pretty well. So you just have to experiment around and play with it. But yeah, if you go online and you look for gluten-free challah pans, you'll see the mold thing there.
So it's more of a dough or a batter that you pour into a mold.
Yeah, that's a foolproof way. You can sort of modify the regular vegan recipe with gluten-free flour and play around with it, and you can get it to be a braid, although it breaks in some places. I've done that, and that worked. But it's going to be a little bit of trial and error if you want to do it.
Have I imploded again over here? Y'all are still moving. I think I had a bad connection for a minute, or my life. Hello, can anyone hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. Sorry, I lost y'all for a sec. No, do not reboot the router. Okay. Were there, oh, how long do I usually let the dough rise at each step? So it really depends on my schedule. Ideally, I would leave it for an hour or 2 right now. If you walk away too long, you might come back to like challah dough covered microwave if you're doing it in the microwave like I do. So maybe an hour. And then very ideally, after an hour of first mini rise, I braid the loaves, and then I put it in the fridge overnight on the tray that I'm going to bake it on, and let it rise overnight in the fridge. If you choose to do that, it's really important to do it on the tray you're baking on, because once the loaves have risen, if you try to pick them up and move them onto another surface, they will collapse and they won't rise again.
Do you cover it in the fridge if you do that?
I sometimes do. I think it depends on how hectic I am in other things. If I do, it's just with a little towel, like a flour sack towel just on top. You certainly wouldn't want to put like saran wrap on there tight, because
Mhm.
if you did that, the saran wrap would contain it as it was trying to rise, and that would not work out for beautiful loaves.
So when do you
So-
when do you braid it then, if you're doing that overnight?
So what I would do ideally is let it rise for maybe an hour
Right.
right now in the bowl, and then I braid it
Okay,
onto the tray, and then I put it in the fridge overnight to rise.
perfect.
Or maybe you could make it in the morning, braid it, put it in the fridge until like mid-afternoon to rise for a half a day, and then bake it. But letting it rise in dough form, letting it rise in loaf shape is going to give you the best, most beautiful loaf that you can get, in my experience, which is other people have others. So what other, something so someone asked a great question. What about turmeric for color? Turmeric has a flavor. So if that's a flavor you like, great. I find that, a lot of challah, if it's very yellow, it probably has fake color in it. If it is very yellow because it had a bunch of eggs in it, then it's the person who is used to that challah is going to taste a difference if you give them egg-free challah. Most people, I think, are not used to incredibly eggy challah, and a lot of people grow up with challah that doesn't have eggs in it at all because of requirements, and Rabbi Shmuley can speak to this probably more than I can, but requirements over what you can say hamotzi on. You don't necessarily want to say hamotzi, or you can't say hamotzi over something that's too rich. So if it has too many eggs in it, or sugar or oil, anything like that, it's no longer hamotzi. So a lot of people just never use eggs at all. So this isn't such an unusual thing. And of course, challah, it's not like in the Torah that there's a recipe of like 6 cups of white flour in the Torah. It's really more of a modern recipe, especially the sweetness and the egginess. Those were added in the past couple hundred years. So it is not that wild to leave those out. And they actually were possibly American development and not even from old country. So going back to the question of turmeric, you can add turmeric if you want, but you might not want to make chocolate chip challah with turmeric dough, or maybe you do. I mean, people make chocolate bars with everything in them, so maybe you do. There are now challahs in like all sorts of varieties. Like you can find chocolate chip challah, and you can find actually our Arizona chapter of Challah for Hunger was making this is years ago, I don't know what they're doing recently, but they made garlic jalapeno challah. And so I hope to one day be blamed for doing to challah what somebody did when blueberry bagels became a thing. But my point is about making all these different varieties, that I like to make all plain dough, because I can turn one batch of dough into 3 different loaves that are all differently flavored. But I have some different flavoring techniques that I use. And one of those that I'm going to demonstrate today, I call the stuffed strand technique, where I take a strand of dough and I flatten it out and put a flavor ingredient in the middle, and then I close the strand around that. And that gives you like a vein or a ribbon of this ingredient in the dough, in the bread when it's baked. Another flavoring method that you can use, I call the dough method, where you add a flavor ingredient in when you're adding the flour. So that might be something like cinnamon or cocoa powder. But just like you have chocolate chip cookies versus a chocolate cookie, you can have chocolate chip challah versus chocolate challah. Or a cinnamon loaf is very different than like a Cinnabon style cinnamon sugar loaf. So some things you can do, like you don't necessarily want to bite into a vein or ribbon of like dried rosemary. So rosemary might be a good ingredient to use with the dough method of flavoring. But again, that would give you a whole batch of dough that's all rosemary flavored. So you just have to balance, like, what am I trying to do with all this dough, and what does that mean for where I'm going to add my flavor? Some other things that I've seen people do is we replaced the water once with chai tea, not once, more than once, with chai tea, and made like chai flavored dough. Or people have added juice instead of, well, with some of the water. You could add garlic powder as you're making the dough. Or you could add like minced garlic in your stuffed strands. So there are just different ways to do things. And I hope I'm explaining the pros and cons of each sufficiently. Any more questions?
Well, it seems if you put in the sweet potato, you don't really need the turmeric for color.
Yeah,
Right.
you might get like more bang for your buck with turmeric, but I guess it also depends how colorful your sweet potato is.
Right. True.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks for talking. Get this out of here. Wow. Okay, so I also wanted to point out, y'all saw how messy my hand was, and you haven't heard the awkward sounds of hand washing on a microphone. So you know that all I've done to wash my hands so far is rub with flour. And you can see that it's a pretty great technique that will prevent you from having all of this stuff in your sink. So I can't emphasize that enough, because this is a huge thing for me. I hate cleaning up like gooey bits from the sink. You can also see that my dough, having been in the microwave for that limited number of minutes, has already risen. And when I opened the microwave, I could feel the heat in there. I am going to wash my hands now, because I was touching the computer and everything earlier, and I'm going to get both my hands on the dough now. So excuse the washing sounds.
Sometimes you could chat.
So I will now show you my not patented pinching technique for breaking this dough up into multiple parts. There is a product or an item that some of you probably have used called a bench scraper, and it's basically a flat piece of metal. It's not sharp, it's just a flat, and it often has a handle. And if I was working directly on the counter, I could use that to just cut through my dough. I'm working in the bowl because I've already told you that I really hate to wash the counter to the degree that I would want to put dough on it. There is also a tool called a bowl scraper that's like a bench scraper, except it is flexible and rounded. So you can actually use it in a bowl. And by the way, these are called scrapers because you can use them to I'm sorry that I don't have one to demonstrate. You can use them to scrape your bench and clean your bench if you have dough stuck to it, or your bowl. But I don't have either of those tools right now. So instead, I'm going to show you what I do right now. Because what you don't want to do is take this dough and pull it to break it. Because if you do that, you're actually breaking all of your gluten strands. I don't know how great my camera is and if y'all can see this, but as I'm pulling, the gluten strands are coming apart. And shortbread, like the cookies, they're very crumbly. They have a lot of shortener in them. Shortener shortens the gluten strands, which is why things with more shortener, aka fat, are crumblier. Little food science explanation. I think I do need to flour my hands a little. So I'm just gonna get some flour. And again, we're not gonna pull. What I do is I grab the dough that I want to get and I put it in between my thumb and my finger, and I just close my thumb and my finger until it breaks off. So instead of stretching it out, I'm just pinching it. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah.
Great. Okay. I'm just gonna move my bowl out of the way now and move on to my surface. I do my best to make all my loaves on this tray, again, so I don't have to clean my counter. And so one thing you need to consider now is the order you want to do your loaves in. If you want to do a chocolate chip loaf and a cinnamon sugar and a za'atar olive, you probably don't want to do the za'atar first because that's going to get all over here and give your later loaves a green and za'atar hue. So I would start with chocolate chips. I'm going to show you how I make a strand. But again, if you don't have my same like commitment to laziness about cleaning your counter and you have lots of counter surface, you don't have to worry about that. So I'm going to show you my strand forming technique. I make sure my hands are floured, and then I just do a lot of squeezing. One of my co-founders of the original Challah for Hunger chapter, she was really great at rolling out strands. That has never been something that I can do very easily. So I squeeze instead, and I keep awareness of the strand so I can see if a part of it is like getting too thin and is about to fall apart. This is like this is way more than one strand's worth actually. So I'm going to break this using my technique and put that up there and continue to move this one. So today I thought we would just do round loaves since Rosh Hashanah is coming up. But one thing to be aware of if you're braiding loaves is that if you're doing like a 3 or a 4 strand braid and you make really long and skinny strands, your result is going to be a long and skinny loaf of challah. So I don't tend to make my strands longer than this because I think that makes a pretty nice loaf shape. But to make a round loaf, we actually with Challah for Hunger, I'm not really involved anymore, but my encouraged loaf is always the twist and coil, which I will show y'all. And you can actually make strands of any size because we're just going to take 2 strands, twist them together lightly, and then coil them in a circle. So strands of any size will always make the same size circle. So you don't have to be great at your strands. So for the stuffed strand method of flavoring, what I do now, I make my strands and then I flatten them out. And I'm going to demonstrate right now with cinnamon sugar because it's kind of a tricky, if I haven't lost you, there it is. It's kind of a tricky ingredient. Sugar is technically considered a liquid ingredient and it acts like a liquid kind of when you're pouring it. Like if it has a hole it can escape through, it's going to. So I'm not trying to like put cinnamon sugar everywhere. I'm just trying to lay cinnamon sugar down on the middle. But something really important to remember as you're doing this with chocolate chips or cinnamon sugar or almost any ingredient is that the chocolate chips stay the same size, but what does the challah do? Everyone knows the answer to this. Okay, it gets bigger as you're baking it. So if you were to put like 1 chocolate chip here and 1 here and 1 here, that's going to be like little hints of chocolate chip. But I assume that if you want a chocolate chip challah, you want a chocolate chip challah. So do more than you think you need. I'll use a whole packet of chocolate chips and 3 loaves of challah easily. But right now I'm going to show you what I do with cinnamon sugar since this is a really good flavor. So I fill my spoon and I hold my spoon parallel to the strand, halfway, like in the middle of the strand, and then I just tilt the spoon and move it along the strand. And then I get more and more and more. And then when your strand is full, I'm just going to pretend that I did all of it. I kind of stand to the side. You can see that I've like moved my elbows to the side. You could also turn your tray. That is probably the way easier way to do this. Always learning. I use my thumbs in the middle to push down where the flavor ingredient is, and then I pull the sides up and pinch. And with cinnamon sugar, you want to be pretty aggressive. You want to pinch pretty hard because anywhere there's a hole as you're braiding this, that cinnamon sugar is just going to escape from there. It's like sand. So pinching pretty hard. I also want to show you how I do this with chocolate chips so that you can see how much I was not exaggerating when I say how many chocolate chips to use. I keep my chocolate chips in the freezer because then I eat them slower. That's my little confession about that. This is literally how I do chocolate, like more. Because remember, the chocolate chips stay the same size, but the dough is going to grow. So like this is how I do a chocolate chip strand. But again, closing it up the same way. It's not as imperative with chocolate chips to not have any holes in your strand because they aren't going to leak out like cinnamon sugar is. Sometimes I make peanut butter and jelly challah, and I get asked, should we do peanut butter in one strand and jelly in the other? That will give you some bites that taste like peanut butter and some bites that taste like jelly. But again, I would assume that most people who want peanut butter jelly challah want both flavors in both. So I would put peanut butter and jelly in the one strand. Peanut butter and jelly are quite hard to work with. One trick you can do with peanut butter is blend it with powdered sugar, and then it becomes more solid, like the peanut butter in the middle of Reese's. But you can also get like the freshly ground peanut butter, and that's a little more solid too than like the pre-ground like Jif bottles, jars. So I'm, in order to not spend too much time stuffing that strand, I'm just gonna pinch it off there and close that up. And now I'm gonna lightly dust my hands on top of the strands. The reason I'm doing that is the thing I mentioned earlier, that you don't want the strands to be so soft that when they're rising and baking that they melt together and you lose your braid shape. You want that. So you want these to be separate pieces that are like woven and braided together, but not squished together and not melting together. So I kind of do like a light coating all the way around the strand. Can you all see it on there? I guess it's kind of glary. And you might be looking at this like, this one's a lot smaller than this one. How are they going to braid together? And I would just say like, challah is blessed and it's going to work out. It'll be okay here. So for the twist and coil, we start in the middle and make an X and then just plop the strands over each other. We don't twist because watch what happens when we twist. Or I call it the twist, but we're not actually twisting. Because if we twist, they just become kind of one strand and they break. You see how the cinnamon sugar is just falling out there. So we're just plopping. And then go to the other side, the same plopping. And now I pick it up on one end and coil. And then I pinch really hard because you don't want this to like pop off as it's baking. And sometimes people ask, should I tuck it under? It's way better to just pinch in place than to tuck it under. What's going to happen as this is baking, rising and baking, is the outside will rise outwards. The inside will also rise, but it has nowhere to go other than up. So you'll get a very rounded loaf. And here you have a very simple round challah. And I put that to the side, and then I make my other loaves on the same tray because, again, I don't want to clean the counter. So this method I use with all sorts of things. I've done like za'atar hummus challah using chickpeas and za'atar. I'll do the za'atar first and then lay chickpeas on top. And again, like not single file chickpeas. Like I really pour the chickpeas in there. Also, olives are great. If you're doing like rosemary, you probably don't want to like stuff rosemary in there because I think I already said that like no one wants to bite into a bunch of twigs of rosemary, but you can get some good rosemary action. You could also, there is a method that is a variation of the stuffed strand, and I call it the pancake method, where I flatten out the ball of dough that's going to be a strand, and I pour my flavor ingredient in there, and then I either like fold it up or roll it up or whatever, and then make the strand. This actually reminds me, the reason I never add chocolate chips and the way that we actually developed the stuffed strand method is we tried a few times adding chocolate chips while making dough. And if you do that in a mixer, the action of the mixer and the heat in the dough actually will melt the chocolate chips. And then you get a very mildly chocolate flavored challah, but you lose like the biting into chocolate. The other thing that happens, as you see, is chocolate chips will just pop right out of dough. They're like fleeing. So the stuffed strand method, you're just like encasing them in there. What questions can I answer? I know we have to get to baking, but I'm trying to get everything in real quick. So what else can I answer right now?
Do you want to explain to everybody about the sill pad that you're using?
Oh yeah. So this is just a reusable. I love using parchment paper. And because parchment paper doesn't stick, it's easy to clean up instead of trying to like grease your tray. This is a reusable option, the sill pad. It's pretty great. I don't have much to say except that it's awesome and I love it. Do you have something to add, Gil?
No, I have two of them and gave one to my daughter. I use them all the time too.
Yeah, they're
Do you
pretty
put
great.
oil on the silk pad?
You don't need to, but
No.
something that I do is I often, especially with chocolate chips or any savory loaves, I do lift the loaf before it's risen. Because again, remember, if you let it rise, you cannot lift it off your tray. You need to just move the tray, the whole tray. But before it's risen, with the chocolate chips and with any savories, I lift it and I take salt and I pour salt onto the tray. And it just gives it like a nice salty crunch on the bottom. Which with chocolate chips is a nice contrast. And with the savories, you want that salt in there. I also do the same thing with sesame seeds. I love using sesame seeds that way with chocolate chips or with savories. And of course, you might have a tradition of adding seeds on top. Something I like to do is add the flavor ingredient to the top so that if you have 3 loaves here and one's garlic, which you can't see visually, and one is peanut butter chocolate chip and one is plain, they could all theoretically look the same. And you don't want that because you don't want to bite into a garlic loaf expecting peanut butter and chocolate chips. So I like to put some of the flavor ingredient on top so that I know what I'm about to get. This was really important for our chapters of Challah for Hunger. There was one chapter that was like color coding the labels with little dots of color. So you had to be able to read the color in a dot. You had to just know what the code meant. And I was like, just smear peanut butter on the top and then we're not going to anaphylactically kill anybody, please. So I always add some of the flavor ingredient to the top.
I was hoping to use this everything bagel
Ooh.
seasoning on top.
Yeah, I would use it on the top and the bottom.
Oh,
Yeah.
good idea.
So
good
one
idea.
challenge with vegan is replacing the egg wash. And maybe one of y'all will have an answer. I've tried water and oil and date syrup and vegan honey, and I haven't found anything that helps things like everything but the bagel really stick the way that egg wash does, which is one reason I started doing the bottom method. I don't know. The bottom option.
One recipe I saw says you use the aquafaba.
Oh, I've read that. I haven't tried it yet.
Yeah, so I have powder aquafaba. I don't know how to really constitute that, but if you take it out of the chickpea can,
Yeah.
and supposedly that gives it a good gloss.
Yeah, so for me, it's like I don't mind it not glossy, but it's nice when like the everything but the bagel, all that stuff, when it sticks really well. One challenge, if you are going for a gloss and you add whatever it is right now, if you've added it and your loaf is in this shape and then it rises, all this space in the middle doesn't have that gloss. So what you should do is you can add it right now, but then after it rises, add it again. And that's how you'll get those spots in the middle.
Good tips. Really know your stuff.
Oh, well, lots of trial and error and many years of not just baking, but teaching lots of people. What I do now, and by the way, can y'all see how much my dough has risen? I don't know, it's hard to tell on the screen in 2D, but it is going to town, and that is like the instant yeast. And this is available pretty widely. It's just at the grocery store down the street. You can order it online if you have to, but you should be able to get this. It does come in the smaller packets, but again, I buy these big things because I go through it quickly, and also I'm like an evangelist for instant yeast, so I like to give it to people. I'll just put some in a little baggie, but it does come in the packets as like instant yeast or rapid rise, but make sure it says that you can add it with the flour. So like I said, when I have my ideal challah baking schedule, I make my loaves and then I just put this whole tray in the fridge just like this. That requires some advanced coordination because you have to make sure that you have room in the fridge to put your tray. But to me, it's worth it to do that because then your loaves are fully risen before you put them in the oven. Because what happens if you put a loaf in the oven before it's risen, like if it's this size, the outside starts to bake and then it keeps rising. And it's the same thing I was describing earlier with the gloss. Like it starts to bake and it keeps rising and then you get that crack, which you may have seen if you've like baked too fast. I have in a wild rush made challah from start of like mixing ingredients to pulling it out of the oven in an hour and a half. And it's just so yummy that like, even though it doesn't look as great and it's not as great, but like people eat it anyway. So you can do it, but ideally I put it in the fridge overnight. Any thoughts or questions or concerns or complaints?
My husband wants to eat it now.
Well, where are you located?
In Los Angeles.
So I went to Scripps College, one of the Claremonts, and there's some challah for hunger stuff happening in there, and there should be at UCLA too, but sorry, I can't get you this.
We're just teasing. Quick question. So once we do the overnight and, we let it grow and do its business.
Good question.
What happens next?
Great question. Sorry, my apologies.
No
Thank you for asking. Preheat to 350. Put your loaves in the oven. I usually bake for about 25 minutes. And the classic way to tell if your bread is done is to pick it up and tap it on the bottom and listen if it sounds hollow. It can be hard to judge if you have a loaf that has a ton of chickpeas in it. That changes the density and the sound vibrations bouncing around in there. The great news about adding the sweet potato is that there is a lot of moisture in that. So even if you overbake, that will probably, it won't be the end of the world. But on the other hand, vegan challah, you don't have to worry about eggs. So if you underbake, that also probably is not terrible. I would say 25 to 35 minutes. It's very hard for me to advise you exactly because apparently I hate being exact, but also because it really depends on what size loaves you're making and your oven. And if we really want to get technical, your altitude, but also like what you've put into it and what shape it is, all those things affect your baking time. And that's why I am reluctant to give an exact number because it's going to be wrong for someone, which I understand is annoying. So I apologize. And then after you bake it, you want to, y'all are probably familiar with this, but you want to let it cool before you cut into it and before you really handle it too much. You definitely don't want to like package it while it's still warm because that will create condensation inside of your package and give you some weird wet spots on your baked challah. Sometimes people ask me about whole wheat, and I have used like a half whole wheat. I don't particularly personally care for whole wheat baked products because there's like too much sweetness in the whole wheat and therefore not enough contrast for me with like the actual sweet ingredients. But also my mom would say like, this is not a healthy, if we want to be like really, really healthy, this is not a healthy thing. Like we've put a lot of sugar in it, there's oil in it. So swapping out whole wheat for white flour is making like this much of a difference in terms of your health. I'm not a nutritionist, so I'm not commenting on that, but it doesn't make that much of a difference. It doesn't like turn this into a healthy product to suddenly use whole wheat. So I just like, I'm like, I'm going to eat my challah with my white flour. I wish y'all could smell this. I'm getting like wafts of yeasty chocolate chip dough, and it's yummy. When I am doing a regular, like a downward braid, not a twist and coil, I'm just going to demonstrate with these like 3 little nubs. I usually do a 4 or a 6 strand. But one thing I like to do is, that was me adding flour to keep the strands separate. But this is my little trick because I'm hungry right now, so it's on my mind. So I pinch these at the top, and then I do the braid and pinch at the bottom. And then if I'm doing a braid that's more complex, like a 4 or a 6, the top few inches is often not braided very elaborately, and it looks kind of plain. So I use my pinching method there and just pinch off the top. And then I bake this and eat it before the rest is baked, before everyone else comes over, before dinner, whatever. It's my little snack. What else can I tell you? Wait, I think that you're speaking Tanny.
Yes. Hi. If you do a double batch,
Yeah,
is it just doubling the recipe?
that's what I do.
Okay.
Someone else might have something more technical. I like to consider myself an expert beginner, where like I do things in the like amateur way that work for me, and not necessarily the most correct way, but the ways that work for me. And that's exactly what I do. I just double it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
This recipe makes 3 round loaves, right?
Yeah. If you were to make 2 out of this recipe, they're pretty big.
Uh-huh.
So I get 3
Great.
out of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Three and a few little rolls for me.
Samples.
Yeah. So hopefully, I mean, it isn't risen all the way, but you can see that like this is a good amount of dough.
Mm. Right.
And it works out to about 2.5 cups of flour per batch, which is under the threshold to say the blessing on taking challah. But if anyone's interested in that, hopefully Rabbi Shmuley can come back and share information on that if people are interested. But you don't actually need to with this amount of dough, as far as I understand. The twist and coil is I wanted to explain that a little bit. It's the reason that we recommend that for or that I recommended it. I don't know what they're doing anymore, which is a great blessing actually that this thing carries on without me. But the reason that I recommend it for the Challah for Hunger chapters is because I'm going to shake that off so y'all can see it a little better. If one volunteer is really good, makes like really long and skinny strands, and another volunteer makes shorter squatter strands, and everyone just braids them normally, you have some super long and skinny loaves that take up this whole tray diagonal, and others that like fit in the corner here. And that messes up your baking time, and it messes up how many loaves you can fit onto a tray, and it messes up the loaves. The chapters of Challah for Hunger sell their challah and then they donate the money. So it messes up your sales because your customers don't know what to expect. And one day they might get like an overbaked long and skinny loaf, and the next they might get an underbaked short and squat loaf. So the twist and coil just kind of standardizes so that you can fit, exactly how many are going to fit on the tray, and you can, how long to bake the tray for. So that's where that method, that braid came from. And I mentioned earlier the risk of the loaves or the strands kind of melting together if they aren't floury enough. I think you can kind of see that happening a little bit here. where they're just kind of like melting into each other more than like here you have distinct strands, and here they're just starting to become one. I'm sure that some of y'all have experienced all of these things. Have y'all had some wild challah flavors? I know for a lot of people, the idea of a challah flavor is like a crazy concept. Really good challah memories, anyone? Do y'all bake every week? Or is it like
No.
this time of year is like everyone wants vegan challah because it's that time of year?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're in Phoenix, Arizona now. We moved from California about 6 months ago, and we live with our son, who's 51, and I'm trying to, incorporate more Jewish traditions into his lifestyle now that we live with him again.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, that's a Shabbat dinner is like one of my favorite things in my life.
yeah,
Doing
never
that with my
really
parents.
celebrated it, but I do think about it. And God.
It's just like,
Yeah, this is
yeah,
very
the
good.
tradition.
This is excellent.
Thank you.
Yeah. I lived in New York originally, you probably could hear that. And so I belonged to the Mid-Hudson Vegetarian Society,
Oh yeah.
Rhinebeck, New York. Where are you?
I'm in Austin.
Ah,
But
Michael
I'm a
Clapper's
lifetime.
going to be moving into your neighborhood.
Who's that?
Dr. Michael Clapper. He's an MD vegan doctor from
Oh,
very well known.
okay.
And he's going to be there in October. You should look him up.
I will certainly do that.
Should I put in the chat?
Yeah, thank you.
Great.
So Gil, do you want to add anything? Because you have a lot of baking experience.
No, just I usually braid from the middle, so that I don't worry about that end kind of situation that you
So
were talking about.
maybe you have an answer to this, because I like to do 4 and 6 braids, which I cannot figure out. I used to do that too, like start in the middle, but then I can't like figure out how to do the other end. And then I
Oh.
realized that like this is actually, I quite like having my little nub to eat ahead of time.
Yeah. And the only other thing I was going to say is, having been in that same time crunch, there's a technique where you can put the dough not in a metal bowl, but in a microwave safe bowl at 10% power. So instead of your microwave at full power, you do it at 10%, and you do it for like 12 minutes or 12 to 15 minutes, and it will rise the dough in like 10 minutes, in 12 minutes, so that, it's like you said, oh, I should have put the dough up and I only have this amount of time before people are coming. So I've done
Yeah.
that.
Well, here in Texas, you can just put it outside.
Yeah. So.
But I didn't know about that. I'll check that out. I've found that the microwave is just such a small space that the heat that the yeast generates makes it hot in there pretty quickly.
Yeah, no, that's true. So, and then that big block of instant yeast, that goes all over the place. You don't keep it in that bag, do you?
I have some problems sometimes with skipping.
Yeah, I think it like literally
maybe I should do.
explodes. You didn't mention
So
that
I
when
cut
you.
it, and that's why I cut it, but I didn't explain it very well. But I tried to cut it in front of the camera. So it's vacuum packed when you first get it. And I just take the scissors up here, which doesn't have any yeast in it. Oops, sorry, I'm not on my camera.
No, yeah, you are.
Now I'm pouring yeast all over my loaf.
Yeah,
So I just snip it here, snip like a, till I get this shape. And then I usually, if I am not being lazy and skipping steps, I'll cut again to make it more pourable. And then I do kind of open it up and pour it into a container.
yeah. You have
It's
to,
much more reasonable than dealing with this.
yeah, I keep it in the fridge in a container.
Oh yeah, refrigerate. I don't know if that's technically a necessary, but I do it.
Yeah.
I'll let you know what happens with my yeast covered loaves that I just made. This thing is like $5 for all this yeast.
Yeah.
So I'm not gonna cry over spilled yeast over here. What other interesting challah tidbits can we share with each other? There is
the
a
oth-
recording. Oh, sorry. Yeah, Gil.
The other thing is I'm like you, I don't want any extra bowls. So I actually weigh everything on a kitchen scale and I just put my bowl on top and I just
Yeah.
dump things in until it gets up to the right weight. So then I
Oh,
don't have to even use a mixing bowl. I put the dry ingredients in and then I add the liquid on top of it.
yeah.
And so I just have one bowl and I use a silicone spatula instead of, and the dough comes off that really easily.
Yeah. Yeah. So your recipe must say at each step what
How
you're
many grams?
well, I wouldn't be able to do the math. I'd be like, okay, I was at 460 and I need to add 35.
Oh, no. I zero it out each time.
Oh, it
Yes.
might have been a while since I used a scale. There's one right here somewhere, but
Yeah.
that
No,
is clever.
I zero it out because I can't, I don't like to do the same thing. And
Yeah.
then,
Oh my gosh,
but what,
that's awesome.
but what happens is it's always the same amount of flour and always the same amount of water. So I'm never sitting there trying to guess how much extra flour to add, which is what I
Yeah.
used to do. Because, yeah, I started baking also when I was 18, except I have a few more years because I'm 70 now. So,
Well, you don't look 70.
oh, well, thanks. But anyway, so yeah. But so, yeah, so I've been through the whole thing with adding extra flour and, doing it by hand and then doing it by KitchenAid and stuff like that. So, but yeah, I'm with you. One bowl, if possible, not on the counter. Don't clean anything up.
Yeah. My guiding principles.
Yeah. So, but you did a great job of teaching, I have to say.
Oh,
Excellent
thank
job.
you.
Yeah. So,
Excellent.
and I've taught too, and the two camera technique is problematic. I've had the same technical glitches that you did. So it's kind of hard to coordinate two different ones, one on you and one looking down. So,
I
So
don't
from-
connect the audio on, you can choose in the very beginning when you
Yeah.
log into Zoom, not connect the audio, but the fact that both of my things fell apart just,
yeah, it happens.
So it was difficult for me because I either had to pin you or pin the bowl. So
I apologize
there's
for
some
that.
way, and probably it's just me because I'm older than Gil, but if you could have a split screen kind of thing where the viewer wouldn't have to switch between the bowl and the presenter.
Yeah.
Would be
that was
cool.
that was my fault, because the headset that I was on, or still now, I guess, is the one that's connected to my hand camera. So every time I speak, it's bumping it down.
Yeah.
That was my bad. So Tali Ann asked, here.
Anyway, I'm going to go because I have another class at 4:30
Okay.
Pacific time.
Oh,
But thank you so much.
cool. Enjoy your class.
All
I
right.
have a question.
Yeah.
Since I use the same yeast, let me get my I'm sorry I'm late because the food shopping got a little crazy. I didn't get out of the kosher market until an hour later than I thought it was going to be. So I use the saf, also yeast that
Yeah.
you use. My daughter sent it to me a long time ago, and then I started using it. Now, I noticed that even the instant yeast, but I have always let it sit with the yeast with a little sugar and the very warm water for 10 minutes. And then I
Yeah.
start adding it. But then some recipes say you add it to the flour because it's instant, but some people say no. So I'm getting very,
No, that is the whole point of instant yeast, is you don't have to proof it. You can totally skip that.
so is this a problem that I've been always, I mean, my challah is good, but is there a problem that maybe it would rise higher? Because
I don't know if I doubt that you've counteracted it somehow, but I don't know at what point you're able to join us, but so you may see that mine has been rising, and I did not proof it. I added it right with the flour. Yeah, you don't. I can't imagine that you would be counteracting it, but you can just skip that. Sorry,
no, to skip that, because some people say that it's lighter when you let it proof, even if it's instant. So that's why I'm wondering if some people want a chewy or heavy, and then and I read that when you
I would. This is just my intuition on it, but I would guess that like the amount of flour and the amount of kneading that you're doing have a greater impact than what's happening with your yeast. If you over knead something, it gets chewy.
Okay.
And a lot of people they mix the dough and then they let it rest and then they go back and knead it for 10 minutes. That could actually be making a chewier, heavier loaf.
Right. Now,
or adding too much flour.
I've been using, in the beginning, when I would use it by hand, the kneading, but I've been lately a little bit lazier and using the KitchenAid. And what is your?
I prefer to use I prefer to do it by hand because I do not like how on the mixer, the dough, sorry. On the mixer, the dough like climbs up the dough hook and gets all into that spring at the top. And I hate cleaning that thing out and cleaning out like this hole.
Right.
I would so much rather put in a little bit extra effort by hand. And it's not as much extra effort as you think because you really don't have to do all the kneading that you may have been taught that you had to do. So again, I'm sorry that I don't know exactly when you joined, but I made the dough with really I mixed in whatever amount of flour I added. I made sure I mixed that in totally. And then I stopped mixing as soon as that was totally mixed in. And then I add more flour until I don't need to add any more. So I'm mixing it just enough, not extra. And then I let it rest and then I grated. I didn't do any separate kneading.
Right.
So
okay.
you really don't need to knead. And it actually, too much kneading, that's what develops the gluten strands. So you need some of it, but you definitely don't want those gluten strands. You don't want them too heavy and too strong.
Okay. All right. I just keep on experiment, but I've done the coil and also doing the tic-tac-toe.
Okay.
And in terms of I stopped doing 3. I love 4, and I really want to master 6. But there's something. I'm older than him, and probably the same age, 76. But I'm somehow I could never do the 6, even though I know they look beautiful. But I couldn't do the 6.
Well, I'll tell you something. There have been times that I've braided 6, and then I get done, and I'm like, wait, I somehow managed a 5 plus 1, and I have like a random strand left over. And fine, whatever. I coil it up or tie it into a knot. And then I have my little thing that I get to eat and a beautiful 5. So sometimes that happens and it's okay. But when I managed to like do my 6, I repeat the mantra about what the braid is. As many years as I've been doing it, I still say the thing. For a 4 braid, it's over 2 back under 1, over 2 back under 1 every
Right.
single time I do
That,
it.
6 is, what do you,
A 6 is second to last to the outside, last to the middle. And I'm
Second to
gonna
last.
send out some drawings, illustrations I did of that.
Good.
okay,
And are
And
you
if
gonna
you
send,
if you try to do it and you end up with 5, you're good, because then
Oh.
you just have your little one to eat.
are you gonna
okay.
send out directions on how to make the hollows too?
Yeah, I
Yes.
think Emma will help us with that. But yes, I
Excellent.
have the recipe
Yes.
and
you have
the
to-
illustrations
just-
of the braiding ready to go.
Just like to, hear the direction. I did take a lot of
Yeah.
notes. One other
Yeah.
question is the instant yeast, you added after a couple of cups of flour.
I
right?
forgot to explain why. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what I always learned was, and this might be incorrect, I don't know, it's what I learned, was that you want to kind of insulate your yeast from salt, because salt kills yeast. Salt counteracts yeast. So we do some flour to like, I don't really know if this is scientifically accurate, but some flour in with the liquid mixture that has the salt in it to kind of give it some buffer before adding the yeast. But I don't wait till the very end to add the yeast, because I want to make sure to get yeast in all the dough, fully like evenly mixed in. So that's why I do like half the flour, and then add the flour yeast mixture, and then the rest of the flour.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
What else? I know people have stayed longer than expected. Hopefully I've answered questions. I can keep answering questions, because when people don't ask questions, I'm always worried. So thank you all for asking. And if you have more, I'm happy to stay. If you have questions about like, oh, I really want to do this flavor, what should I do? We can brainstorm that together. But I also don't want to keep anyone if people need to go. I know some people have departed.
Right, and I just discovered, I know for Rosh Hashanah, in terms of using Ceylon and maybe some doing Ceylon and doing the coil and then doing syrup.
Yeah. Are you talking about putting it on top as an alternative to egg
No,
wash?
it and then rolling it.
Oh, inside. So when I've done, have you had one like that? Have you tried it?
Well, yeah. And I see most of the times we have a challah bake 9 years at our synagogue. And every month she does a different one. We never, I think, I don't remember if we ever made a plain one, maybe 12 years ago. It's
Okay.
very wild. We've done a tiramisu. I mean, it's really way out there. But for the
Yeah.
it's like we've done some, salon, or I just found an apple, almost like an apple butter,
Yeah.
instead of all the chopping, but to do the apple butter
Yeah.
jam with the salon in it, and then roll it up, and then do your coil.
So with the question of apples versus chopped apples versus apple butter, I would say that that's a similar like issue of just the difference between a chocolate cookie versus a chocolate chip cookie, because the experience of apple butter is so different than the experience of chopped apples.
Right,
So
sure.
that's just something to think about. They're just like two great and different options. With the Ceylon, when I've tried things like that, I found that it generally just gets absorbed into the dough. So I haven't had great results with just the Ceylon on the inside. But I bet with apple it's good.
Yeah, but apple, if you put the chopped apple, chopped apples,
Yeah.
then spread it, put the Ceylon and the chopped apples together and
Yeah.
yeah.
That sounds
How do you
pretty good.
spell that? Ceylon, I never heard of it.
That's
S-I-L-A-N.
date syrup.
It's date honey, SILAN. It's wonderful.
It's honey from
It's
bees.
not honey. It's really date.
Oh, so, okay,
it's
date
date.
puree. Or whatever.
It's the date syrup.
It's a date
Date
syrup.
syrup.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's a
Since
thick, very thick.
since you mentioned cinnamon, and I did cinnamon sugar, I should have told people, you'll figure out like what ratio of cinnamon and sugar you like. The sugar is what will make your cinnamon sugar goopy. So if you just did cinnamon, you would have like
what?
the gooey.
Okay,
gooey. If you just did cinnamon, you would have like drier clumps, not really clumps, but like drier bites of cinnamon. So I think it's pretty important to get a good mix of sugar in there when you do cinnamon sugar. If you do just cinnamon, it'll be pretty dry. If you
Right.
do too much cinnamon, it will be pasty.
right,
Whereas if you do cinnamon sugar, you'll get the goo like the Cinnabon.
right,
Mm.
right.
I used to put cinnamon in with the dough with the flour, so the dough method of flavoring, and then I would have cinnamon flavored bread, which is really different than like plain bread with cinnamon sugar.
Right.
Y'all can think of that. And cinnamon is actually a natural preservative, so that counteracts yeast.
Uh-huh.
So cinnamon, the cinnamon dough is like much denser. But that you don't have the same effect when you're adding cinnamon sugar.
You were
Like only
talking,
when you put
I know that when I've been mixing half flour, or when I do it for, say, 2 cups of flour and then 2 cups of bread flour, that I always break up the bread flour with whole all-purpose flour. Or you were mentioning white wheat flour. Is that what I heard you say? I was sort of unpacking packages and I want to.
sorry, I just do I use sorry, I didn't mean to
That's okay.
pop out of there. I just use regular flour.
Okay.
Like
King Arthur or
yeah, I've been getting it at the local, like the co-op, so the Field Day brand. I just use all-purpose. Bread flour actually has some like rising components in it. Bread flour has baking soda, baking powder, and maybe a little bit of salt. I'm not sure. Bread flour has things in it that they add that aren't in my challah recipe. That doesn't mean that it's a problem, but you don't need it
right,
because you have the yeast. So you don't need those other elements that will help it rise.
right. Okay, and yeah, and of course,
Sometimes some bread flours have like a little more gluten in them. But mostly the biggest difference between the all-purpose and the bread is just the
and the
thing to
vegans
help it rise.
don't use eggs, so that's a whole new. If I was, I'm not a completely vegetarian, so that's how I was. But for those, if I have a guest, who's a vegetarian and or vegan, I wanted once to be able to make a challah,
Yeah.
for them.
Or from different communities who, if it's someone who is observing Shabbat in a more observant way, some communities don't say hamotzi, which you need to say to have a meal on challah that has eggs in it.
The challah that has what? I'm sorry.
If challah has eggs in it, some communities don't consider it bread to say hamotzi on.
I've never heard it because because the Rebbetzin is Chabad and we've always put eggs in. That's the first thing.
Oh yeah. I also come from a background where that challah. I mean, traditionally, this tradition of eggs in it is only like 100 or 200 years old. It's a pretty new tradition in terms of Judaism. But
in respect to the chickens, we might as well stop using any eggs at all. And doing that thing with spinning it over their head. I mean, like, I know Shmuley has been very adamant about, like, we have to cut it out. This is now. So, on a good vegan diet, you wouldn't even consider using eggs.
Yeah. Also, just like another ingredient that you don't need to buy, you don't need to take the time doing it. Like this challah is so good.
Yeah,
you don't need that.
There is a product called Just Egg, which is a liquid formula, and it makes an incredible omelet and a scrambled egg, and it's made out of mung beans.
I wonder if that would be a good egg. I can't think of words anymore.
Yeah.
The egg on top.
Right.
Egg wash.
Oh, egg wash. Good idea. Good idea.
And I haven't tried baking with it. Maybe you can give us some information on that, Carol. But I mean, This is pretty good challah. The biggest complaint is I ate
Whoa.
too much, not where are the eggs.
Exactly. And it's what you put on the challah that counts,
Yeah,
right?
or
I
in
just
it,
got
in this
some
case.
big jam, you know?
Yes.
It's really exciting. Jellies, you know, the vegan butters, the vegan cream cheese. You get anything these days. So it's pretty amazing.
Yeah. There's actually,
So-
I just learned that this brand of jam, if we have any, this company saved Jewish kids in the Shoah.
Yes.
Oh,
Maryland Mama.
yeah,
Yeah,
Y'all knew
Yeah,
that. Okay, I
from-
just learned
from
that.
France.
yeah.
So amazing.
It's a
Yeah,
beautiful
from
story.
France.
That's the only jam. I love that. I've been using that jam for years. It's not cheap, but it's wonderful. It's a really good preserve. It's a really,
Yeah.
Yeah.
really good.
Just don't forget, if you're doing the stuffed strand method, you definitely want to leave the edges of your strand. My hands are black from picking up the bowl, which is in a cast iron pan. So if you see my hands, don't be alarmed. If you're gonna do peanut butter and jelly challah, like stuffed strand, don't forget to leave the edges of your strand clean. Just put your jelly in the middle
Where-
so that you can pinch it closed. And that you have to balance that with the fact that your dough gets bigger, but the jelly stays the same size. So you want to use a lot of jelly, but you still want to give yourself room to pinch your strand closed. But another way that you could do that is flatten out your strand or your
Right.
blob that's going to be at the strand and like do a layer of jelly and then roll it up.
See, that's how I do all my, when I stuff things, flattening it out and then
Yeah.
rolling it up. But there was something you
But
just,
the difference, but some things, like I love a loaf that I bite in and there's like a huge river of cinnamon sugar or chocolate chips. I want that with that. So if you use the roll method that way, you don't
you won't
have
go. So what would you have? I'm sorry, what would you have that would get that? What would you have if you get that?
to get the like river, the vein
Right.
of ingredient is the stuffed strand method, where you just take your strand and flatten it out and put your flavor ingredient. And this is in the documents that I'll send out, but put your flavor ingredient in the middle and then pinch your strand closed around it and then braid.
Oh, yeah, right, pinch it around it then.
We
Then
will.
how do you get one that's a rope in that way if you're just pinching it?
I pinch pretty hard. You don't
hard.
you don't have to be delicate. Here I can turn my camera again.
I was gonna say, Tally actually, or sorry, Ellie actually did demonstrate this. The recording will be posted on our.
But yeah, I don't want to make you go backwards. Thank you. Yes,
Oh,
thank you.
I have all that challah left to braid still.
So if you missed the beginning, we actually will post the recording so you can check that out. And yeah, because I think we need to start wrapping up here soon.
But I am gonna send instructions out, the recipe braiding images.
Perfect.
So
Oh,
look
that's
out for
wonderful.
those. And
Awesome.
I really have to emphasize, like, more chocolate chips, more, always more.
Okay.
I didn't mean to yell at y'all, sorry. This is a really important issue to me. And yeah, you can cut me off, Emma. Not with chocolate chips. You cannot cut me off from chocolate chips, but you can cut off my video.
I see now. Gotcha. Yeah, okay. Gotcha. Right.
All right. Well, Ellie, was there anything else you wanted to add before we wrap up here?
Well, I think challah wise, I'm good. I would say Shana Tova to everyone. And feel free to be in touch if you have questions or if you make beautiful loaves and want to share photos. Little small world news. Rabbi Shmuley, Mayim and I figured out that we're very distantly cousins.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Ellie.
That was a random tidbit.
incredible.
Sorry.
Oh no, we love tidbits. And thank you everyone who
Thank you so much.
still stuck around. Yeah. And I just wanted to remind you before we go that we are still accepting applications for our synagogue vegan challenge. as well as we are looking for applications for our college fellowship. So if you know any students that are in college, tell them to apply because it'd be a great way to get involved. And Shana Tova, everyone. And thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Excellent.
y'all.
Bye.
Thank you.